I want to start by saying I don't think that Leonard is a heroic figure by any means. However, well, let me backtrack a little. So I've written this book called the IDLER'S Glossary, and the idea behind the book was that I wanted to defend idling without defending laziness and being being a slacker. I think that too often, in my reading and in regular life, somebody who looks idle, somebody who looks like they're not accomplishing much and doing much, is sort of castigated as being lazy and pigeonholed as a useless person who's sort of to be morally frowned upon, really. When very often some of the most creative, interesting, passionately engaged people, in life, artists and writers and other sorts of people are they are the same people. They look lazy from the outside, but we can't always tell what's going on underneath the surface. So I wrote this book, The IDLER'S Glossary, where I guess what was happening is as I was writing for a magazine called The Idler in England. This is 10 years ago I was doing this. And I was using the thesaurus and trying to find other ways of saying idle besides just using the same word idle and idler over and again. And it was shocking to me how many terms are supposedly synonymous that seem to me to have quite different valuations to them. So that's what the idea of the IDLER'S Glossary is about. And I've actually also written a sequel called the Wage Slaves Glossary, which to me, the whole part, I was worried about writing a book called the IDLER'S Glossary because it made it seem like I'm some sort of aristocratic person who doesn't need to work, and I'm telling everybody they shouldn't work anymore. And in fact, I've always had to work since I was 15 years old. So the Wage Slaves Glossary was kind of the other side of the coin, which is how angry I am at the way most of my bosses are and the way most workplaces are organized. So the IDLER'S Glossary, so idling is being I think it can be quite passionate. It can be very engaged. It can be creative. It can be imaginative. But it does involve rejecting a certain ethos that, especially during the period when this play was written, had come to be the dominant ethos, which is that everybody lives to work. That's the work ethos of our culture and of Western culture generally. We live to work. Whereas the Idler says, no, we work to live. We should, this goes all the way back to Aristotle, who was the first person to articulate this Idler philosophy, the idea that the point of life, the goal of life should be leisure. It should be play. It should be imagination. It should be making music. It should be making love. It should be spending time with our friends. It should be conversation. It should be philosophy. And we should work only as much as we need to get to that point. And that's what the role of work is. And of course, Aristotle's writing in a slave state in Greece, where they have, the point of in Greece is the idea is to get yourself out of debt, get yourself some slaves, and they do the work, and then you can be this idle person. So there's always a political, economic ramifications to this very idealistic idea. I'm very aware of that. Still, I think it's a beautiful transvaluation of values. The idea that I agree. I don't agree with the way Greece was organized, but I agree that we should work to live, not live to work. So that brings me to phase one of, I want to say three things about this play. So Leonard's family considers him lazy and useless. And as the play goes on, it's fairly hard for us not to agree that he is lazy and useless, actually. However, one of the definitions in my book, something I came across when I was researching this book, was the concept in mechanical engineering of the idler wheel, which is where you have cogged wheels and they're moving things in a certain direction, and you need to have one wheel that turns the opposite direction in order to transmit power from this cog to this cog. This is called the idler wheel. It's moving in the wrong direction. You can see the metaphor I'm working on here. In his family, Leonard's a bit of an idler wheel. He actually, he's this very conservative, hidebound, sort of false family with kind of some unadmirable values in certain ways. And within his family, by kind of going counter to all of them, by being an idler, he's actually performing, what arguably is a valuable function in his family. By the end of the play, his father has begun to change. Even his father, the most hidebound character in the play, has collapsed here in this chair and has begun to question himself, question his relationship with his wife, question whether he's always right. That's a very valuable thing that Leonard did for his family. His mother seems to maybe come out of her shell and become a little bit more herself, by the end of the play. He was right about his mother. He might have had some kind of fantasies and read too much into his mother's characters. It's unclear, but certainly within her family, she may have been playing a little bit of a role that Leonard is helping to free her from by the end of the play. His brother, he has no effect on his brother. His sister-in-law, who's sort of to me one of the least sympathetic characters in the beginning of the play, is kind of lovely in the end, and is bringing me to tears in that last act. The way she, even struggling against her own value system, at some level knows that she hasn't been kind and that she should be kinder. Again, without meaning to suggest that Leonard behaved in an admirable way throughout the play, by being an idler, he's disrupting things in a way that feels salutary and feels like, to use a kind of distasteful capitalist expression, creative destruction, that he's in a way destroying things in order that a new culture can be built on top of the ruins. And I want to make a point about Leonard, his sort of dandyism. You don't really see it too much because you never see him out in the world and out in the street. But in the first act of the play, there's a sense that he's shocking to people. The way he dresses is not right. The way he acts. His sister-in-law, his future sister-in-law at that point says, if I can quote him, "I don't feel safe with him, and I don't know what he'll do or say." He's a refusenik. And again, it comes from a bad place in some ways. It does come from kind of an entitled, lazy, selfish place. However, the fact is that in Victorian England with Oscar Wilde and other dandies and flaneurs and aesthetes, the idea was an interesting one. They kind of portrayed themselves as lazy and selfish and useless. They were very happy to have people castigate them for that. However, reading them through the lens of today, through the lens of performance culture and guerrilla theater of the 60s and so forth, dandies were doing something very interesting. They were an urban phenomenon in these very busy city streets where people were hustling and bustling back and forth, doing useful things. Dandies very ostentatiously walked very slowly. And there was one famous one, Gerard de Nerval in Paris, who walked a lobster on a leash one time. And it's very easy to say, well, they're these sort of selfish, egocentric show-offs. But I think they were trying to protest against, in the early days of industrial capitalism, they were seeing the culture change from a culture that was a little less hurried and busy, and efficiency wasn't the sort of highest value of the culture in those days, and it became that in the 20th century. So they're these sort of transitional figures mounting a sort of protest against that.